It's Thursday, March 30th. It's draft season. And like I mentioned on the last podcast, what a treat for the next month here. Every single Thursday, we have on the show joining us our very own Charles McDonald. Chuck, what's going on, buddy?
Nothing much. I think we're actually just like exactly a month out from the draft, right? So I've been doing my studying. Me and Charles Robinson have been working on All Juice team. So we actually have takes this year, which I didn't really have this time a year ago. So I got my start in this business by covering draft stuff, and I feel like, now doing it at Yahoo, I've kind of come full circle. So I'm excited to dive in, I think.
I was gonna say, like, what is your relationship with the draft at this point? Because everybody, I feel like, has a love-hate relationship with the draft if they've covered it for a long time. And yeah, like, I think we first found each other like on the dregs of draft Twitter when you were like at McDraft or something like that way back in the day. So
that's back when I was just all about the draft, and I kind of got bored of it after a while because the way that I feel about the draft is if you take any 4 consecutive year span of the draft, you're going to see so many storylines recycled like over and over and over and over again. And I'm just talking about like prospect narratives. This quarterback has great skills, but he can't throw it. This running back has great skills, but he's not, the fastest guy out there. Character concerns at the top, blah, 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 blah. So I kind of just got a little bored of that. But, it's been fun to dive back in this year because I do think, at some levels, this is a pretty fun class. But yeah, like I think the people who can do this like every single day, 365, it's just a different way to be wired, man, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, they're built different. That's for sure. Like, obviously I've been looking over some of like the NFL.com profiles that Lance Zierlein does. And I mean, that dude writes up like 500 guys. But the thing that kills me about the draft, and we'll get into the meat of the show here in just a second, but like the thing that kills me about the draft sometimes is like, nothing is worse than like in my mind wasting my time on like some dude that's never gonna do like charting some for perception like charting some dude that's just never gonna do anything in the league. And I do like maybe 20 15 to 20 guys in a receiver class any single year. We got guys like Lance, like built different, like literally writing up like 500 dudes who like are never gonna stick in the NFL.
Dude, yeah, that was kind of like one of my breaking points, because I remember the first year I did this, I think I watched like 315 draft prospects. And then, like a year and a half later, I went back to look at my rankings. Like, dude, like 80% of these guys are about to be out of the league. And it's just, it's a lot of time to spend when there's literally almost no payoff, except, sometimes you get like a 5th round pick, right? And you're like, ooh, Twitter dopamine. But outside of that, the payoff becomes less and less and less, I feel like, as you get older.
I think the number one rule is don't like dig your heels in and get in fights with people about like prospects, which I'm sure you and I have done in our younger years when we were more foolish. Like, let me fight you over this guy that's going to go in the 5th round and might play some special teams for a couple years. And then, that's it.
That's why I have in my Twitter bio former arguer, because I don't have the patience to just sit there and argue about something that, like, once I log off, I'm not really thinking about that much. So why am I going to let it make me so angry in the moment? But that's all draft coverage is. We're all a little bitter, angry, and anxious for 4 months. And then we forget all the mean things we were said once the draft actually happens.
Well, let's hope. I have still not forgotten the all-out wars on fantasy Twitter about like the good and bad Michael Thomas from the 2016 draft. God. Let me tell you what, that didn't age so well for the bad and good. Like, which Michael Thomas was named the good and bad Michael Thomas.
Well, I'll tell you that. And a lot of times, like, the NFL will kind of sort that out for you. Like, the good Michael Thomas went round 2, and the other one, or I guess no. In this example, the bad Michael Thomas went round 2 to the Saints and ended up making like $100 million playing for them. And the good one was out of the league, I think, in like 2 years. I think he still plays like special teams, or maybe that's a different Mike Thomas. I think maybe that's a different. No. That's Michael Thomas's safety.
No, there's a wide receiver, Michael Thomas, I swear to God, that like played for the Rams and then I think he was on the Bengals. But Michael Thomas, by the way, not a super uncommon name. So
right, yeah. It's two of the most common names you can get in English speaking nations. So yeah, that's not really that helpful.
All right. Well, I think we've dwelled on this topic quite enough. Hopefully, people didn't make it 5 minutes of the podcast and be like, listen to these jerks that have fake jobs talking about how tough it is to evaluate the draft and cut it off. Yeah. But if you were stuck with us this far, let's get into it. It's a pretty light news week outside of Lamar Jackson news / no news. So, Charles, unless you'd like to give us a full breakdown on Marvin Jones' fit with the Lions.
Well, you're just now breaking it to me that he is re-signed with the Lions. So I got nothing for you there.
I have even less.
Look, if he's playing a lot of snaps, I think something's gone wrong there. So,
yeah, I have even less for you. So, the only thing we have in the news is it's uniform news. Players can wear the number 0 now. Your former buddy Calvin Ridley immediately announced that he's going to be wearing number 0 in Jacksonville. Speaking of like being back on the dregs of draft Twitter, I used to have some real strong takes on uniform numbers, and we've really lost the thread on the uniform number thing. So just real quick,
it's all good. It's all good stuff.
Yeah. Your take on the number 0 is it's good,
it's
bad.
Good.
Yeah,
it's great. I think it's amazing. And I think, maybe this is just me being like a little number liberal, but I think you should just let guys wear whatever they want, except for offensive linemen. Offensive linemen, you got to stick to 50 through 79. But literally any other position on the field, go crazy. I want to see Vita Vea be able to wear number 0. Why not?
Yeah, and maybe this is me being a hardliner for traditional jersey numbers, but man, I used to hate like receivers wearing numbers, like 10 to 19. I was like, only 80s. That's how you know you're a professional. And we've lost the thread of that so far. Now you got Calvin Ridley wearing number 0. Like we said about the draft stuff, I've grown up to this point that I'm not going to sit here and go on Twitter and be like, this is bad or this is good. Everybody should literally, like you said, just do whatever you want. Hey, big old 350-pound guard wants to wear number 0. I say
no. Defense, it has to be a nose guard, not an offensive guard. Because we can't have offensive guys. That's where I'll draw the line. But literally anyone else, if a punter wants to wear number 0, you got to be like the best punter in the league. But you can go for it.
That was what I was gonna say. It's like when we had the kicker whose name was Chris Blewett. I was like, this guy's just asking for trouble with that name being a kicker. I think if you're a kicker and you go out there with 0 on your back, I think that's asking for trouble.
Yeah, well. You're putting a bit of a target on yourself. How is this related to the draft?
I don't know. So let's get into the draft. But first, before we talk running backs, which is our position of choice today, we're going to pretty much go like position by position. Running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, and maybe we'll sneak in some offensive lineman talk in that tight end episode as well. I do first, before we get into the running backs, want to talk about the draft as a whole. Like, what is the overhead view of this class? Is it a good class? Is it a bad class? Like, what positions are strongest within it? Take it away. The 30,000-foot view of the draft, as the Corpo Lords say.
It's an interesting draft. I think it's kind of like, it's good at some of the unsexy positions, like, I think the offensive tackle class is really strong at the top this year. So along with like the interior offensive line class, as far as the center and the guards. So if you're looking for someone to block for you early in the draft, I think there's a lot of options for you, really, no matter what team you are, what needs you are, like what kind of player you're looking for. It's a pretty strong draft at the top there. You have, some stalwarts at along the defensive line, Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, and then, some second-tier guys like Nolan Smith and Lucas Van Ness. But I think at wide receiver, and we'll get into that next week, at some of the skill positions like wide receiver, someone just asked me, Quentin Johnson would be like the weakest wide receiver 1 since when? Or Jackson Smith and Jigba. Those guys aren't, the dominating type of guys that we usually think of at wide receiver. And I think that that's kind of true for some of the other skill positions, like the safety class. It doesn't really have too much. I mean, the top guy is probably Brian Branch, and he's even more of just like a slot defender type of guy. He's not even, a classic center field safety. So if you're looking for big guys, I think there's a lot there, especially if you're looking for like run stuffers on day 2. I think there's a lot here for you. But it's not that sexy of a class. Like even the quarterbacks, there's reason to be excited for all of them, but there's a lot of reason to be a little bit nervous too. It's not like the Jaguars walking this number 1 overall and getting to pick Trevor Lawrence right there.
Yeah.
I think, there's kind of merit for a lot of guys to be in discussion for number one this year. And it makes it interesting, but at the top, I think maybe some of our expectations will be tempered for some of like the non-blue chip guys that we end up talking about.
Yeah, the quarterbacks in comparison to last year, it's so much better, right? Like at this time last year, folks are trying to talk themselves into like Kenny Pickett in the top 10 for the Panthers. People are trying to talk themselves into like Malik Willis in the first round, stuff like that. I mean, we have the potential at least for like 4 quarterbacks to go in the top 10. And this isn't the quarterback episode, so we'll go further into that there. But that's at least exciting. I'm with you on the wide receiver thing, which again, we'll break down further. But I've heard it's a really good corner class. Like I think that seems like it's the most like stacked position.
Yeah, the corner class is really good. I mean, to me, I know it's deep because I've watched a guy like Kelly Ringo play for the Georgia Bulldogs for 3 years, and he's a really good corner and had a fairly strong pre-draft process, and he's like maybe the 4th or 5th best guy this year, and he started for like the best defense in college football over the past 2 years. I think the crown jewel there is Oregon cornerback Christian Gonzalez. He's just one of those guys where you just need to watch 4 or 5 plays and you're like, okay, he moves at just kind of like a different pace and level than the other guys. I feel like we have these guys every few years where, it just takes a couple plays to just see that they have it. And he's one of those guys. And then after that, you have Devon Witherspoon, who's projected first round pick, Cam Smith from South Carolina, who's another first round guy potential, Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State, who also has potential to go in the first round. And then Maryland, they have a pair of cornerbacks, Deontay Banks, and I forget the other guy's name, but they could be top 50 picks too, based on the off seasons that they've had. So it's a strong cornerback class, not a super strong wide receiver class, and the running back class, which talk about, like you have your headliner in Bijan Robinson, but I think there's a whole lot of other guys that can make an impact pretty early on in their NFL careers, which I think is becoming the norm with the running back talent we've seen enter the league recently.
I'd argue too that like since Bijan Robinson, like we're going to talk about, is like one of the headliners of the class. It's usually not great when like one of the blue chippers is a running back, right? And we're not going to be like labor suppressors here on this podcast and just want to crush every single running back. Every single running back signing, it's got a F grade in free agency. Every time you draft running back in the first round, F draft grade. We're not going to do that, but it just goes to show that like, yeah, this draft, again, like you said, it might not be sexy. One other thing just on the draft as a whole, before we get into the running backs, it seems like to me there's like a handful and maybe like more than usual, like older prospects in the class. And I mean, even watching like the NCAA tournament, like March Madness and stuff, it's like, damn, they got like these dudes that look like they're 40 years old out there playing, which is weirder than usual. Do you think all this is a result of just like the COVID seasons and guys staying longer, or is like the transfer portal and like the NIL stuff, is that going to start to like impact the draft more in the next couple of years? I don't know. I've been thinking about it lately, and I find that like fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's been a big thing as far as the draft goes, because there's the COVID year, and then I think I feel like we've seen a lot of guys, a lot of graphics and articles about guys over the past year or so. Where it's like this 7th year senior is playing with Oregon. They had a guy who's there for like 8 or 9 years. Even some of these quarterbacks that are coming out, they've been in college for 6 years, and they're a little bit older. It's definitely the COVID season.
Isn't Hendon Hooker like your age?
Yeah, I wish. No, he's 25, going 26. I'm not that young anymore, but dude, it's crazy. Me and my friend Justice offline. Justice has to take that COVID ruined the draft for like 4 years because all of these guys got to spend a little bit longer. I mean, look, even Stetson Bennett, like if without the COVID year, he would not have been Georgia's quarterback this season because he would have run out of eligibility. So I think we're getting closer to the end of this, but there's still a whole wave of people who are like freshmen and sophomores in 2020 who are still going to get to exercise like that COVID year, right? Really at any point, because if you were on a college football team or any collegiate sports team in 2020, then you have rights to, basically a COVID year. So maybe in like 2 or 3 more years we'll be out of it. But I think for now, we're definitely still seeing the impact of that by seeing a handful of older prospects entering the draft, and we'll see how it ends impacting their career. Because usually, when you talk about draft stuff, you tend to shy away from the older players, but that's just not really an option right now because of what was rightfully afforded to them during the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think that is going to make a big deal of difference to these folks, especially that like they play Dynasty, they play Fantasy, they use all these like age adjusted production models, or like, oh, you're not an early declare, immediate like negative, but that could be not true for the next couple of years here, which I think is just important to talk about. And like the NIL stuff too, I think is interesting. Like I saw some tweet today that Arch Manning has made like $3.7 million in like NIL money. So I don't think we've seen that type of stuff affect the top of the draft yet, but I could see in a couple of years, like, oh, these guys are making enough money in college football, which by the way, good. They should make that money. Like, what do I need to go into the NFL just yet? I could just sit in college football and make a boatload of money and be like the biggest dude on campus.
You know, there's a lot of guys where it will make sense for them to consider that. I mean, think about guys like, you know, like Tim Tebow ended up being drafted in the first round, but like there's a spot where if he had the chance to, can I take this Florida NIL money from being, you know, GS on Florida's campus, or should I go get this NFL money? Like for some guys, it's going to be a real thought process for them. And, you know, I think especially guys who end up being like long-term starters for big time schools without like huge NFL prospects, that's kind of like your mid-tier of the draft. And even those guys could say, well, either I could make like $600,000 and be the man on campus for one more year, or I could go get my ass beat in the NFL and not make as much money, but I could have the perks of being an NFL player. Like that's going to be a real topic of conversation for guys who aren't at the super tippy top of the draft. Because obviously, you know, if you're projected to be a top 3 pick, almost no NIL deal is going to make up for that kind of money. I mean, I saw like Bronny James NIL, his evaluation, I think, is set at like $7.2 million. And that's literally LeBron James' son, and that's not like top of the draft money. Those guys are still going to declare, but I think it'll be interesting to see how it affects like the middle and the end of the draft moving forward.
Tebow is a great example. I'm thinking about like Colt McCoy back in Texas.
Right?
Yeah.
You want to be a 3rd round pick, or you want to make like $1.5 million playing for Texas for one more year?
I mean, running backs too, which this will transition us into running backs. Like, obviously, for a guy like Bijan Robinson, who's going to be probably a 1st round pick, it doesn't make a difference. But yeah, running backs, like, do you want to get like put into the meat grinder of the NFL? Which, oh, by the way, they don't pay you guys there anymore, anyways. And you know, you're going to be a 3rd round pick and just get grinded into dust. Like, yeah, I'd actually probably rather just sit around here on campus, be like the biggest show on planet Earth, and even if the NFL hates me, I'll sit here and make some money. So I think that is going to be a topic of conversation going forward.
Dude, I was literally just talking to someone yesterday. And we were just laughing, like we were looking at the running back market and what kind of deals these guys have gotten. And let's say, you know, a Saquon Barkley level talent is coming out in the draft. I know the rookie contract is a little bit different, but like the second contract that these guys are getting, it's not a whole lot of pennies over here. Like that in the linebacker market have just been nuked this offseason. So, you know, we're about to talk about some running backs. Hopefully they can make the most of this career, because it's even crazy seeing someone like Miles Sanders, who I think is a pretty good running back, just get like pennies from Carolina, where basically they can cut him after 2 years of a 4-year deal. Saquon Barkley, like that franchise tag has gone way, way down over the past few years because running back contracts aren't what they used to be. So yeah, it's a punishing position, but you know, this class is kind of a good example of why the price is getting driven down, because there's a lot of guys that can come in and just step into a role, whether it's a starter or back by committee role, and they can come in and be productive players immediately. And I think when you look at why running backs don't get paid, just think about how many people there are between, you know, 5'9" to 6'1" that are 190 pounds to like 230 pounds. Like that's not exactly a very hard body type to find, compared to, you know, offensive tackles who are 6'6", 330 and can move like people who are much lighter, or even someone like Will Anderson, where you're getting, you know, basically 40 tackles for losses over the course of a college career. The running backs, they're pretty easy guys to find, and unfortunately for them, it's going to impact their earning potential.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, you also get like every dork on Twitter or every media person like bagging on Miles Sanders. They gave him $6 million. It's like, geez, my God, yeah, what a running back stuff's depressing. Running back stuff is depressing. So on that note, let's get into the running backs in this year's draft, because I agree with you. Like, there's a lot of intriguing players here, but of course, got to start the conversation with Bijan Robinson out of Texas, 5'11", 215. He is supposed to be like the guy at the position, potentially discussed as like the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley, who we know he went second overall in a
second.
Shout out Dave Gettleman, baby, in a draft where a bunch of quarterbacks went inside the top 10. We try to erase Josh Rosen from our memories, but he was also in that draft. 4 quarterbacks in the top 10 that year. I don't think Bijan Robinson's going in the top 10, but I could at least think of a couple teams that might be frisky enough to do it. But how good is Bijan Robinson? What makes him like a special prospect?
I think we've evolved enough where he won't get drafted as high as guys like Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Todd Gurley, Christian McCaffrey, in that top 5 to 10 picks. But he's as talented as those guys. At least I think. I think he's one of those rare runners where maybe the only thing he doesn't have is like super duper elite top end speed, but he still ran a 4.4, which is more than fast enough for used to be like a bell cow running back. He's got the receiving chops. He's got, my favorite part is just like it's the balance and the vision through contact, because in the NFL, you're not going to be able to avoid guys like getting their hands on you or getting their pads on you. So the guys who can kind of stay upright and power through some of that stuff tend to be, I think, guys who you can start to build like a running game and really a foundational piece of your offense around. So I don't really see an avenue where this ends up where he's a terrible player. I think like most running backs, fit is going to be important for him, because that's kind of how you maximize the ceiling of what these guys can do. But I don't remember who said it, but I saw it on Twitter today where there's no bad fit for Bijan Robinson. And that's how I feel like he's, it feels dumb to say once in a lifetime, because we've seen a lot of these guys come up in the past few years, but he's one of those rare guys where if someone takes him in the top 15, I wouldn't protest it, because I do think he's that good. And I just still believe that we haven't found all the ways to calculate like how valuable running backs can be to your offense, and just how to really assess all facets of what they bring to the game. And he's one of those guys that's a 3-down back that can, it can really change your offense.
I agree with you that I think there's something about the run game that it doesn't come out in the numbers necessarily, but when literally everybody in the NFL, anybody that's ever like stepped foot on a football field really will tell you it's a big deal, like to be able to run the ball well. And I get it. Like maybe you don't want to spend a top 5 pick on Zeke Elliott, but man, it was pretty epic when you put Zeke on the field behind that Cowboys offensive line when it was at its peak. Again, yeah, you could find some dude on the third day to give you great production and stuff like that, but I think people forget, I always say this about Zeke, people forget how incredible he was to start his career, just because of how it's ended and how he's become like the hated fantasy back that's, depressing or suppressing Tony Pollard and stuff like that. But I feel like Bijan could have the same effect for anyone out there. I know you said like there's no offense that he doesn't fit. Is there like a particular run scheme or style of offense you think he would fit best in? And on his receiving skills, like where does he stack up as a receiver? Because that was obviously something that's going to make you more and more valuable as a running back.
Yeah, I don't. As far as receiving goes, I don't think he's like a Christian McCaffrey, but that's also like a one-on-one type of situation. Totally. But he's in the next best tier. And I used to go back to Todd Gurley's tape at Georgia, and he wasn't a guy that got a whole lot of receptions, but when you watched him play and the plays where he did catch the ball, like it was something that he definitely could do. And that kind of became a piece of his game as he developed with the Rams and became their bell cow back for a very, very brief sort of time before.
Dude, a brief and like incredible time.
Incredible run.
His 2017 and 2018 seasons were incredible. And like you said, he had 81 targets in 2018. He had 87 targets in 2017. And he's definitely not like a McCaffrey type of receiver or any of those type of, he wasn't even like Saquon was heralded as more of a receiver coming out than Gurley was. But yeah, Jared Goff would dump that thing off to Todd Gurley, and it would just, like he would pick up extra yards. 9.1 yards per target for Todd Gurley in 2017. Like he was incredible.
That year was crazy. Yeah, dude, I remember using him on like wheel routes and stuff like that. That was nuts. But I think if I was looking for a team that would be a great fit for Bijan, like I would love to see him on the Eagles. Yeah. And I feel like that's probably true of just about any running back, because you have just a straight up dominant run blocking offensive line with Jalen Hurts. It's going to be a productive situation for any back. But I just think when you look at his ability, or not his ability, but that team's ability to get running backs with like one-on-one looks at the second level.
Yeah.
It's just like a dream matchup for him because he's going to give most linebackers, nightmares when he gets to the second level. And then you have Jalen Hurts kind of pulling some pressure off of him because if you commit all the way to Bijan Robinson, now you got Jalen Hurts running free in the open field. It'd be a really tough matchup for most defenses. And it's like the same reason why I'm excited about Rashad Penny this year. Granted, he can stay healthy. Is the same reason why I would love to see someone like Bijan Robinson in that role because it's just perfect.
Nick Sirianni's out here at the league meetings talking about, hey, Trey Sermon. I look at him and I just wish there was some way we could get him more carries. I'm like, you make those decisions, buddy. Like, if you really wanted to do it, there's a way to do it.
I wish I could eat healthier, man. It's just don't know how to do it.
Don't know how to do it. I wish I could drink less beers. That'd be so great. But unfortunately, there's nothing that can be done. There's nothing that can be done. Well, that was going to be my last question on Bijan Robinson. I was going to basically dare you to find an elite landing spot for Bijan that's also realistic, because I agree the Eagles fit would be awesome, but it doesn't, and they have the 10th overall pick, so there is that, but like it doesn't feel like a very Eagles move. And then I don't think that he's going to fall to the bottom of the first round. I mean, I guess there's a chance, but because like he's on everybody, like Daniel Jeremiah and all these big time draft folks, is like he's like the fifth overall player, or even higher on these big boards. I just feel like there's going to be some team in the middle of the first round that gets like an itchy finger and ends up drafting him. But dude, there's not a lot of
land spots.
No. I mean, I keep coming back to a team like Washington at 16th overall that doesn't need a running back, but just like, again, they're going to get that itchy finger and they're going to pull it on Bijan. So if you could see like give me one realistic, but like, oh man, that is an awesome landing spot for Bijan Robinson.
Oof, realistic, but awesome. Well, it's tough because like a lot of these teams, they have fairly settled running back situations. I mean, I've seen him mock to Atlanta a handful of times, and I don't really think that makes sense because they just had Tyler Algier run for 1K yards, and like quite frankly, of the best, like the last month of the season, he was one of the better backs in the league. So that doesn't really seem like where they would go. Tennessee, you start looking at maybe a Derrick Henry long-term replacement, but now we hear talks about them wanting to trade up for a quarterback potentially. RIP Malik Willis to happen really, really fast. I
that was fun last year. That was fun.
It was a fun time. I mean, there was a time around this time last year where he was mocked like number 2 overall to Detroit, and by the end of the season, they picked Josh Dobbs off the street to start a potential playoff game for them. So I think that one's about over. I think if I had to go with a landing spot that makes sense that might really work for him, Chargers.
Yeah.
Depending on what happens with Austin Eckler and his situation there, but like they've quietly really started to rebuild that offensive line, depending on what happens. How Rashawn Slater looks coming back from injury, but they're pretty much settled with Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson, and they have some good help on the other interior spots too. I know they need kind of a right tackle to even that thing out, but you look at Justin Herbert and what he's able to do. Kellen Moore, who already knows how to get explosive guys the balls in their hand, especially running backs. I think that would be a fun fit for him as far as fits that are realistic and good. I think a fit that's realistic and not too good for him would be like Tampa Bay.
Yeah,
where all you have is you still got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Tristan Wirfs, but that's kind of about it. Like they're
Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask.
The Kyle Trask stuff. Like people saying that this is a quarterback battle. No, it's not. It's not, because if there was one at all, they would have at least let him battle like Blaine Gabbert to be Tom Brady's backup, but they didn't. So I think Baker's coming in there to start. He's going to just get pulverized for a season, and then they'll figure out what's up next after that. But, I think Bijan could be like one of those picks where it's like, all right, dude, you are going to eat your rookie year. Like, you are going to get pummeled. Kind of like the way that Todd Gurley was his first year with the Rams. But then if they can get quarterback help, like if they're bad enough on offense where they can get like Drake May or Caleb Williams in draft next year, then you start to look at it like, okay, well, we have this piece for a young quarterback to help us figure it out. I think kind of like the way that this Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones thing ended up materializing, where you have Saquon comes first, and then you have, a strong piece to help develop your next rookie quarterback. So I think that top 20 area is where he gets picked, but when you start going through like the teams who have these picks, it's kind of hard to find a landing spot for him, which is why when I've done these mock drafts for Yahoo, like I usually have him falling to like 30 for the Eagles' second pick, which I think would kind of be a slam dunk for them because they're one of these teams that they don't have a whole lot of needs and they can kind of use that. Either one of their picks is a luxury pick for what makes sense for their team.
Yeah, it would definitely like take that offense to a whole nother level, and it doesn't really need that. By the way, as awesome, we're talking about Todd Gurley getting pummeled. As awesome as that 2017-2018 run, his 2016,
so bad.
3.2 yards per carry. I remember actually writing an article for NFL.com that was like, don't draft Todd Gurley in fantasy in 2016, and when he was going like, and is one of the first few picks. And it blew, the NFL team like tweeted it out and blew up, and he ended up like coming after me for it. But I was right. I hate to say it, Todd. I was right.
We'll just blame Jeff Fisher for that.
That's what I said. That was literally the entire article. I even responded to him. I was like, it has nothing to do with you as a player. Unfortunately, I think your team's just gonna stink. And It did. They did. That was correct.
The 20s, not to get too off track, but the 2016 Los Angeles Rams is one of those teams that was like, dude, how are you guys even like fielding professional football team? And this is the results. I think they averaged something like 13 points a game that season or something like that. It was really, really, really awful stuff. And it feels like everyone ended up coming out of that situation like okay, because even Jared Goff he was able to recover and now he's a quality starting quarterback. Todd Gurley was able to get on the right track. It's just funny how like a quick coaching change can really change the fortunes for everyone.
The only thing that's interesting about that 2016 Rams team is that Kenny Britt randomly had the best year of his career. He had 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, and he never did anything like that again. So in like the stone cold worst environment, he somehow, but then again, you're running your offense through Kenny Britt. That's probably not going to be very good. So I think the one realistic landing spot that could be something like, it does depend on some of these veteran backs. Like, if Eckler gets moved, that would be a great spot for him. But if Eckler's still there, that's a disaster spot for everybody involved. But how about the Bengals? Like, the vice president of the team is extremely non-committal in a recent interview. I can't remember her name or where the interview was, but like about Joe Mixon's status. Like, if they take him late in the first round, that would be a great landing spot for Bijan Robinson.
That would be a great landing spot for him. And I think, especially after getting Orlando Brown, who, I have concerns about how this fits with him as a pass blocker because Joe Burrow is one of those guys where he'll kind of take his time back there like Mahomes, but he's not Mahomes, So I kind of feel like that could be a little bit a struggle there. But outside of that, like in terms of the run game, I don't think there's any reason to be concerned about what Orlando Brown brings. And they've spent some money upgrading the rest of the offensive line. So that could be a good spot for him. And it will kind of fit like this era of Bengals football where it's like all flash, no substance. We got the receivers, we got the quarterback, got a running back. Don't ask about the offensive line, especially the right side.
Definitely don't. All right. The second running back in the class seems like consensus is Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama. 5'9", 199. He's known more for kind of his like potential receiving projection. But do you think he could what's he like as a runner? And do you think he could end up being a lead back in the NFL?
I think he could. The problem that I guess people have had, and I guess something that we got to figure out was, what do you do with his running style at 199? Because I thought that, and a lot of guys have gotten this comparison over the past few years, but honestly, I thought when I watched him, he kind of reminded me of Kamara because it's just, it's like the compact size, it's the explosiveness, but the similarity I thought that they had was kind of being able to, for not smaller backs, but shorter backs, really being able to keep balance through contact, which, like we said with Bijan, is a really important thing for running backs to have. But, at 199, is that really a running style that's going to hold up for you in the NFL? Like if you're just running around trying
because Kamara is 215. Like he's 215. He's a good bit bigger.
Right. Exactly. I think it lessens his outlook a little bit in terms of like, all right, he's probably not going to be someone that gets us 300 touches a year, but 200 like in a smaller role, maybe we can keep him alive. I think a situation that could work out well for him would be like kind of what the Cowboys had going with Zeke and Tony Pollard, where you got your big brother back like Zeke to kind of, be the bell cow. and short yardage stuff and handle pass protection duties. But when you need a play or a big play or trying to get a spark, like when they would bring Tony Pollard in, I think that's a role that could fit well for him. But I think the weight kind of lessens the outlook as far as just being a big bell cow back.
Yeah, I mean, he can hit up Eckler. He's 5'8" and 200 pounds. I guess maybe he could kind of work into that type of thing.
That's not a bad comparison, actually.
Yeah, I've heard that floated around before. I mean, we'll see if he can match Eckler's workout routine, but I mean, that's a whole nother thing. But I will say this, like, in terms of potential landing spots, I can think of a couple off the top of my head that have like a banger back and need sort of a space back. You brought up Alvin Kamara. Like, I think the Broncos could use someone to go along with Samaje Perine, who they pursued heavily and Sean Payton was really after. I think that could be potentially fun. Well, it's not really that fun because the Broncos offense doesn't really look that fun. And then what would actually be fun, though, Kansas City has Isaiah Pacheco as a banger back. Like, you throw Jahmyr Gibbs in there, that would seemingly be a perfect fit.
Yeah, it just all depends on where you're kind of willing to take that, because I know that there were before the combine, like, he was still kind of rumored in that late first round area, but I don't think that the hype is still the same level. I think a fit that would be kind of fun would be the Dolphins, depending on how they decide to shake out their running back room, because they have a lot of guys that are just around on kind of like 1-year deals, but I'm not sure that they have someone that they're really kind of invested in to keep around, where you don't have to keep recycling guys in and out every single year, even though with Mike McDaniel, that might be a feasible path for production for them.
That would be awesome. I think the Dolphins are one of the few landing spots that they get, and they don't have a ton of draft picks, but
no,
they have Raheem Mostert, they have Jeff Wilson, but those guys can take kind of the grinder carries and leave Jahmyr Gibbs to do some of the fun third down stuff, pass catching stuff. That would be a great landing spot, I think, for a guy like this. So a lot of potential for him, I think, to land in some interesting spots. But in terms of like projecting him, I think he's going to be very like landing spot sensitive, because if he ends up on a team, I don't want to keep bagging on Tampa, but like, if he ends up on a team like that already has sort of a spacey back, like Rachaad White, they're going to throw him into the meat grinder there. That would be tough. There's, I don't know.
It's tough, like finding landing spots for some of these guys, because there's a lot of good running backs in the NFL. Like, I don't think that, watching these guys get paid less it's not reflective of their talent. It's just, there's a lot of good guys, a lot of settled situations, and I guess this is just kind of going to be what we do every single year. Man, like, there's a lot of good running backs coming out, but there aren't a whole lot of spots for them, which is going to end up, pushing them down the board.
I'm telling you, man, I've been thinking about this since like January, looking at free agent lists, being like, there's a ton of good running backs available in free agency. There's a ton of good running backs in the draft, allegedly, and there are not a ton of good landing spots out there. So that, like, guys are just going to walk into big workloads. So it's definitely something that's going to be a theme, I think, going forward. Next guy on the list here, we've got Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA. Bigger dude, 6 foot, 214. The little I've read and seen about him seems kind of like James Conner-ish to me. A grinder dude that is potentially like solid as a receiver, which I think gets underrated in James Conner's game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The only thing that I get worried about with Charbonnet, I don't think that he's as. And it's funny because this isn't really James Conner's game, but like, I don't know if he's as fast like on tape as James Conner is, or even as explosive. Like, I think he can be a good battering ram, or I would even suggest put on a few more pounds and be kind of like a goal line specialist. But I get a little worried watching him in college, because like, his game is just so centered around being able to bully people, because he's not a guy that's going to run away from people, and it's not in the same way where. I was watching Tyler Algier last year, and the long speed was concerned, but the first, 5 to 7 yards, as soon as you get the ball, there's some burst there and some power there. Mm-hmm. I don't really quite see the same thing with Charbonnet, but he's like one of those guys that's not super explosive, but he's smooth with it. Like, he's smooth and he's powerful. So those have, places they can fit, but he's to me, he's more of like, this is where you start getting to like the middle round backs, round 3 or round 4, where there's a handful of guys that can be productive players, but like, I don't see him being a bell cow back. He kind of reminds me of one of those bigger backs that could fit in the Shanahan scheme, not like Arian Foster per se, but the discount version of that, if that makes sense, where, you're not getting like the same high-end athletic plays, but it's the same kind of thing where, you have a patient outside zone runner that's big with balance and can kind of get those tough yards for you without being a big home run hitter.
You know what my favorite part of draft season is that it quickly just becomes like, dude, remember this player? Like, remember just guys naming dudes and stuff like that. Like, that's literally that's what draft season becomes. Like, man, remember Todd Gurley? Remember Arian Foster? That's the best part.
Remember those guys that were in the NFL like not too long ago,
like 5 years ago. It feels like forever ago, but it was not forever ago. But yeah, Zach Charbonnet, I think that's interesting. Again, another guy that's probably going to depend. Like, how excited are we going to get with him based on where he lands, or does he kind of settle into like a Jamal Williams type of role? Where, I mean, the thing with Jamal Williams is like we're so clouded by the touchdowns that he had last year and obviously, his personality and stuff. But like back in Green Bay, he was just sort of like a not explosive, but solid running back that's just like coach's catnip because they love those like reliable type of guys. Maybe he slides into like an early career Jamal Williams type of role. I could see that.
Yeah, that'd be. I think he's just one of those guys that needs to be part of a committee, which is it's not a bad thing. It's just is where he is.
Devon Achane, next guy on the list here, Texas A&M, 5'8", 188. I mean, he's definitely got juice, but like, what role can we project him into with that size?
I mean, unfortunately, with the size, he falls into like whatever people call satellite backs, where it's just you're going to be third down receiving role most of the time. In the NFL, I don't think this is a guy that you want, sticking up linebackers and pass pro and stuff like that, because he's probably just going to get run over. But he's kind of an interesting player for me to watch. And sometimes like these guys can be tough to parse for me, where I see your size, but sometimes he just plays a little bigger than that. But then you have to be realistic and be, all right, he's still, his playing weight is probably going to be anywhere from like, let's call it 175 to 185.
Yeah.
Is that really going to be someone that's you're pounding between the tackles like they did at Texas A&M and grinding out some yards like that? Probably not. But I think what he has that can help him transition away from that type of role is the speed. Like the speed's unquestionable. And I think he showed it at the combine. That's where he's going to be able to make his mark on the receiving stuff and the speed. Because, Texas A&M, they did use him as a grinder at times, but that's not where he's going to make his money in the NFL.
Yeah, 36 catches for only 196 yards last year, but the year prior, 24 for 261. I mean, Nyheim Hines seems like the consummate satellite back in today's era, but even he's like almost 200 pounds. Like he's like 190 plus.
He's a little bit bigger. So I'm not really sure what the fit is, but I do like his game. Like if I had to bet on one of these guys that falls outside of kind of the size parameters that we talked about earlier, I would kind of bet on him having a pretty productive career just because I think he's a good football player. He's got the skills. But he's also a guy where it's fit that matters the most for him. Because if he ends up on one of these teams that, kind of plays a little bit of prehistoric football on offense, I don't think he's going to be all that successful. Like him ending up on last year's version of the Patriots would have been like the worst fit possible for him. But in the right role, I think he can have a pretty productive career.
Yeah, there's a guy, Deuce Vaughn, in this class. It's like 5'5", 180.
Yeah,
I mean, that
5'5" might even be a stretch, man.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that is the short king running back prospect. I don't even know what to do with that because he's like, I think he might be like 5'4". I don't care to just sit and figure out like, all right, what does this look like? We'll see what happens when you get to the league, and if it happens, we'll celebrate you.
I saw our mutual friend Derek Klassen. Somebody asked him recently on Twitter, like, "What are your thoughts on Deuce Vaughn?" And he just quote tweeted 5'5". Like, I don't know, like, what else do you want me to say? I don't know. Next guy on our list here, Roschon Johnson from Texas, 6 foot 219. Obviously, he's the backup or running mate to Bijan Robinson, but he looks like a bruiser type. And I'm telling you, there's like a handful of dynasty bros who think he could be like a lot more in the NFL. Do you think that is possible, or is he kind of capped out as a running mate?
I think it's possible for him because he's one of these guys that has like there's not a whole lot of tread on the tires, but also you understand why he didn't get carries over Bijan Robinson. Like,
right.
So but to me, that doesn't really have anything to do with his skills as a running back or what's possible with him. He's just in a situation where he's behind one of these marquee guys that you're just not going to get snaps over. But to me, I like him a little bit more than Charbonnet. I think his speed translates a little bit more. He's got the power and vision. I think that's really going to work out for him. I don't know what grand ideas that Dynasty Twitter has for Roschon, but I don't see why he couldn't be one of those guys where you look back and it's like, oh man, he had a couple 1,000-yard seasons and was a productive player for a couple teams throughout his career. He's just like one of those guys who's solid, not flashy, but the more you watch him, you kind of get an appreciation for his skills.
Yeah. It has like one of those random LeGarrette Blount New England Patriots years where just he has a bunch of touchdowns, 1,000 yards. I could see that. That makes a lot of sense. Next one here, Tyjae Spears out of Tulane. 5'10", 201. He averaged 7 yards per carry at Tulane. That's cool. Yeah. Although I do remember that being thrown out a lot about like Darrell Henderson. Who Darrell Henderson's had his moments. I don't want to be disrespectful.
Yeah. I will take it to my grave that the Rams picked the wrong running back there. They should have stuck with Darrell, and the Cam Akers infatuation was a little bit strange to me.
I always liked Darrell Henderson. He would give you moments. He would just immediately get hurt afterwards.
Yeah,
he'd give you like 2 great games and then get hurt. But anyways, he apparently Tyjae Spears apparently had a great Senior Bowl. Tell us a little bit about him.
Classic, just home run hitter. I mean, 7 yards per carry it kind of speaks for itself. The question is like, all right, well, when you're not going against guys who play for Tulane or play, in that conference, what's it going to look like? But by all accounts, he had a good Senior Bowl. I wasn't in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, so I'm just going to take people's word for that. I was covering the Shrine game instead, so I didn't see him at the Senior Bowl.
Yahoo had you going literally everywhere else in the country at that time.
except for Alabama. We got a Charles Robinson jury on that one. They sent me to Vegas and said, oh no, it was so bad for me.
What a shame.
But he's like he said, he's a home run hitter. To me, he's just like classic in the NFL, like just a classic change of pace guy. Probably not going to be, one of these heavy carry type of guys, but he's someone that you're going to want around in your offense for a long time. I have trouble like thinking of a comp for him because I'm dumb and I just can't think of guys right now off the top of my head. But 7 yards per carry, he's pretty good, I think, in the open field as far as getting away from first contact. And I think those skills, getting away from first contact and being able to maximize your yards like that, it's going to lend himself to getting drafted maybe in the top 100. But if not, he's in one of those guys that probably ends up turning into a steal pretty quickly, which I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, or at least like when I'm watching these guys, I feel like I'm saying the same things over to myself. Oh, he's not a first-round guy or maybe a fringe top 100 guy, but man, in the right situation, he could be a baller. And that's how I feel about Spears.
It just kind of goes back to the whole conversation that we're having about running backs, which is there's a lot of potential for all of these dudes, but it has to be in the right situation. And honestly, like anybody that plays fantasy football knows this. So much about running back, success and putting up big production is not just about ecosystem, but it's also about benefiting from chaos. I mean, you get a team where the starter goes down or, whatever. I mean, James Conner's a great example that, like, he's splitting carries with Chase Edmonds in 2000. Is that 2021? Yeah, 2021.
Yeah.
And then Chase Edmonds gets hurt, and James Conner goes on this like insane run to end the year. I mean, he was scoring touchdowns at a high clip anyways, but then he was like churning out big games because the other guy in the backfield went down. And that's like most of how these guys end up moonwalking into opportunity. And Tyjae Spears, I could see being that type of dude. We talk about Darrell Henderson. Like, yeah, just for a few games stretch or whatever, he has like these monster games in the right environment. I could see that.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of running back careers that fail just end up being like wrong place, wrong time. Because so much of your production is, not all of it's manufactured, but a lot of it is out of your control, offensive line play, how much teams respect your pass game, quarterback play, like that all factors into it. So just because you don't have a super productive spot or run doesn't mean that you lost your talent, because a lot of it, like I said, it's just not in your hands as a running back.
it's different too at the receiver position when there's 3 guys, at least 2 guys on the field every single play, and it's like, well, if you get open, you're gonna get targeted. Like they're gonna throw the ball to you. Like why does George Pickens not have more targets than Deontay Johnson? Well, Deontay Johnson's like open all the time, you know. So I mean, and there's other stuff that goes into it too. But it's difficult at running back where there's one dude on the field. And like it comes back to the Sirianni thing that we said. Like, who's making that call, Nick? I don't know. Who's making the call to put Trey Sermon on the field? It's very hard to say. Kendre Miller, next guy we've got on the list here. I wanted to throw him on here out of TCU because I've seen a good bit of this dude while watching Quentin Johnson. He's 5'11", 215, good size. He definitely has the juice from what I've seen. Like there's a couple times watching him, like, oh man, that guy like, you know, pops off the screen. And the production is there too. So he's yet another dude. It's like, I think could be a sleeper in this class.
He's someone that like for real can be a sleeper. Like I think in the way that Kareem Hunt ended up being a sleeper for the Chiefs, where, you know, we take this guy who's got, when you look at things that NFL teams value, like checks off a lot of boxes. You know, you got the size, long speed. I think what's really fun about Kendre Miller is the power. Like he can run over some guys, which I think is not always super common. I mean, you're looking at like a 215-pound guy, but not only can he run over guys, but he's got the agility to make guys miss in the open field. He's just one of those guys where I watch him and you're checking off a lot of boxes across the way as far as, you know, what do a lot of productive NFL running backs have, and running backs with staying power. And man, you know, I know that probably playing in the Big 12 helped him a little bit as far as like broken tackle rate goes, but it's hard not to just like look at what he was able to do on film and not be impressed by a good amount of it. So, you know, I think he's a guy where if you grab him in the 4th round or something like that, if he's there, that you could look back very quickly and be like, oh yeah, we got a steal. We found like a real deal starting running back. Just because I think he has a lot of skills that translate to, you know, what other bell cow backs have in the NFL.
I couldn't agree more. And that's like, I'm not going to have a lot of strong takes on these running backs because I'm doing enough work on receivers that I'm not going to sit there and grind running back tape because I'd like to have a life. But I mean, again, just from what I've seen, that's exactly how I felt. Like he's explosive. He can run people over. Just 1 yard shy of 1,400 yards and 17 touchdowns last year. And Kareem Hunt's a great name that he lands on a depth chart and eventually just like claws his way up quickly. Because Kareem Hunt had that like big game his rookie year with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I mean, there's a lot of teams I could sit there and think about. Tampa Bay, I would bring up them. I mean, definitely a meat grinder sort of situation, but even like Minnesota. Like Minnesota brought back Alexander Madison. I still think they move on from Dalvin Cook at some point. And I could easily see like, oh, we're talking about Alexander Madison. This is his first time to start in his career. And then like Kendre Miller goes in there. He gets picked the 4th, 5th round, something like that. And he just beats him out in training camp. And like, oh, all of a sudden we're talking about a guy that we both think has legit skills and is now the lead dog on a good offense. I mean, Minnesota's got questions, but probably a pretty good offense.
I just think he's going to be one of those guys that could be a dark horse, like rookie of the year candidate fairly early, just because I don't really know, you know, what part of his game is supposed to be, you know, scary as far as things go in terms of projection. I think for some teams, he might end up as like a top 100 talent. And I think probably the only thing that would help him, that would stop him from going a little bit higher might be like the valuation of running backs. And, you know, I kind of wonder, as he starts getting going, I think that sometimes the reason he has to break a lot of tackles is because he's not like the fastest long speed guy, but he does have bursts like within 10 yards. I think that helps him get going pretty fast. So I think he's one of those guys where his body type and his game is kind of perfectly made for the NFL, and we'll see what happens with him.
Next guy up here, Kenny McIntosh from your Georgia Bulldogs, 6 foot, 204. Obviously, he's played on a crowded depth chart throughout his career at Georgia. A lot of those dudes went to the NFL, but he did have over 800 yards and 10 scores last year, tied for the team lead.
He's weird because he's not like, I don't as just a pure running back, I don't think there's like a whole lot there to get you excited, but he's got a really good feel for the game as a receiver. And you know, a lot of it is manufactured stuff for him as far as like how they're going to get their touches, because they, you know, through injuries and, you know, guys not being what they thought they were going to be, maybe coming off the transfer portal, they kind of needed a third receiving threat, or really even a second one, because, you know, you have Brock Bowers, and then outside of that, it's kind of open up for grabs. And he fills a big role as far as like their passing production way. He kind of reminds me of like James White for, that played for a while with the Patriots. Kind of like James White, if you start giving the ball between the tackles, not really too concerned about what's going on there. But, when you start getting him out a little bit down the field or ask him to do a lot of stuff as a pass catcher out of the backfield, that's where McIntosh can kind of hurt you and make make defensive pay. But I don't even think he's a guy that would be like a slot receiver convert. He's just like a strictly third down back, and that value is going to wildly range from team to team because some teams, they really like their running backs to be a part of the pass game on third downs. Other teams want those guys into block. So like his fit's gonna be really team dependent, but it's unusual to see a running back kind of get funneled through the passing game like he was last year, which should intrigue a lot of teams. Yeah,
James White's a good comp there of like not a guy you're going to split out at slot, not going to line him up out wide, but just like a reliable, you get the ball in his hands in a tough spot. Tom Brady didn't want to get hit, dump it off to James White type of situation.
Yeah. That's what Kenny's going to be doing for the next few years, I think.
Last guy here, we've got Israel Abanikanda. Incredible name. And more incredible pro day, bro. I had to put him on the list here because, 5'10", 216. At that pro day, he just had an unofficial 4.34 second 40-yard dash time, 41-inch vertical, 128-inch broad jump. That's some pretty freaky stuff. I saw Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, the workhorse that we mentioned earlier, compared him to Isaiah Pacheco, bigger back with a lot of juice. What do we think about this guy? I know he kind of like just popping on the thing lately with the pro day.
Yeah, I did text some people while we've been on this just to get some takes on him. And nice. the consensus has been like the freak athlete, but plays with blinders on. There's a reason why we haven't really heard too much about him before today, kind of deal. It's not like Pitt is one of these programs that no one's heard of and people aren't watching. And sometimes
they had the first, like, the only quarterback going the first round last year and the Belindikoff winner in 2021.
Right. So we know we're very familiar with this program. And to me, like, we were talking about narratives right before we started getting into all of this. And to me, this is one of those things where you can kind of narrative scout it a little bit. We got a running back at a big-time Division I school that has, Pitt upsets is a meme in college football Twitter. They've knocked off, I know they beat Clemson when they were at the peak of their powers recently. They're usually a pretty tough out for people. And the fact that, like, we haven't really heard of him too much until the pro day, I think kind of probably says a lot about, like, where he is just as, like, a functional football player. But anytime you're, 5'10", 216, pushing 220 pounds, running damn near a 4.2 and jumping out of the gym like that, you're going to get drafted. So, yeah. At that point, like, when you're playing those measurables, I will draft you sight unseen in, like, the 5th round because those are just dart throws anyways. But I do think it's kind of a little bit of a red flag that we haven't heard too much about this guy who played for a big-time Division I program up until his pro day.
Shoot, you take that dude in the 5th round and, like, it doesn't work out. He can't play running back. Then,
whatever.
Who cares? Yeah, we'll find somebody that's a UDFA or whatever. He did have 1,400 yards this last year and 20 touchdowns. So that's not nothing. But there's more to the position than just like scouting, like box score scouting with. But like
backs. when you're in college and you're that much of a physical outlier against who you're going against, because even at like. At that level of football, you're talking about like top of the ACC, there still are a whole lot of guys that are 5'10", 215, running a 4.3 and like showing defensive lineman level of explosion, So he's going to get drafted, and then it'll just be up to his running back coach and offensive line and offensive coordinator to try to get the most out of him.
Yeah, that Pacheco comparison is kind of interesting. Just on he's. Pacheco plays a little unhinged sometimes, but he's in a great spot.
Great spot,
running back. So, if Abanikanda ends up on, not gonna end up on the Chiefs, but some other like the Bengals or something, and they don't add anything to the running back room, or the Bills or something like that, I'll take notice. But if he lands on the damn, I don't know, the Raiders or something, probably won't care.
Yeah.
I don't know. No disrespect to the Raiders. They have some great players on offense. But
yeah.
Anyone else that we missed that needs to be highlighted? I know there's like Zach Evans out of Ole Miss. Any other dudes out there that we should mention?
Yeah. Zach Evans will be the only guy just because I think when you're looking at the draft, a lot of the times high school pedigree can follow you from your days as a senior in high school over to the NFL. And Zach Evans, he's one of those guys that was billed as like a super duper recruit. Like he has some good football tape, like at TCU and Ole Miss, but for whatever reason, he's really fallen down the board this year, and he's probably going to end up being a day 3 pick. But I think those guys who have like the high school pedigree are always a little bit interesting because it means at some point someone thought pretty highly of you. And it's not like he had like a bad stats profile. It just wasn't like super dominant like we've talked about with some of these other guys.
All right, well, that's a good name to mention. And that's going to do it for us, Charles. I appreciate you. Our first edition of this draft prospect preview series. We got quarterbacks next week, so there won't be quite as many caveats of this is depressing or anything like that, or no good landing spots. So we're gonna have a lot to talk about next week, but I appreciate the running back stuff, man. Obviously these are going to be some names hopefully people can hear about at some point during their career.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid group outside of Bijan. He's the top dog, but besides him, there's a lot of guys that can contribute year one, and that's probably going to be the norm as we keep moving through draft cycles and more running backs into the league. I think this group is it's indicative of like the talent that is to come.
Well, that's pretty good. We had an hour on the running backs, a position that like I was super not familiar with like this time last week and had to cram in a little bit of work on. We got quarterbacks next. That's gonna be great. Receivers a couple weeks from now. I mean, that could be a 2-hour show. So clear your schedule for that one, you and everybody that listens. But for now, that's going to do it. Make sure you're following him on Twitter, the Charles McDonald at 4verts. No longer McDraft2 or whatever, but at 4verts. I mean, come on, man.
I'm grown up now, somewhat. Somewhat grown up.
Somewhat. That's the best we can hope for. You can also follow me on Twitter at @MattHarmon_BYB. While you're there, it's always a good time to follow at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm going to be back on Tuesday with more of our teams that will shape the draft series. We're going to be talking the Lions and the Colts. Oh my God, the Colts. What a mess that will be to unpack. Until then, we're out.